Mike Waddell and David Glenn coming to you from the ACC Football Kickoff here in Charlotte, the Westin Hotel, the annual end of summer ritual as it's almost football season all around the Atlantic Coast Conference. And coming into this event, a lot of negative headlines or controversial headlines about the ACC since the end of basketball season, the revenue gaps, the spring meetings, and now it's all coming to rest on the shoulders of the young commissioner, Jim Phillips. And David, this is a very turbulent time for the ACC.
It is, Mike, and there have been more negative questions than any commissioner would want to deal with. It's also been on the field 2 straight years where the ACC was not in the college football playoff. And that's after 7 straight years under this relatively new format where the ACC was a participant. So if you take a step back on the field and you take a step back financially, you're going to hear these negative questions that Jim Phillips was kind of trying to fend off a little bit earlier this week. In my eyes, sometimes people lose the bigger picture. The reality, if you and I look back at the last decade of college football, here's the bottom line. The SEC has won 6 national championships. The ACC is next with 3. It was Florida State that won in 2013. It was the blooming dynasty of Dabo Swinney at Clemson that won national titles in 2016 and 2018. So it's fair to say that the ACC is financially behind the Big Ten and the SEC. That's just a fact. It is also fair to say that on the field, the ACC is behind the SEC. But if you have 3 national championships in football in the last decade, you're only behind the SEC. And the Big Ten, which has 1 in that decade, would rather be you in that regard. The Big 12 and the Pac-12, which have 0 in the last decade, would wish they were the ACC with 3 of the last 10. It was Jimbo Fisher at Florida State in 2013. It was Dabo, of course, who's still at Clemson. Jimbo long ago left for Texas A&M. The Dabo dynasty is real. Clemson will be in the mix again. And Florida State under Mike Norvell now also has a legitimate chance to be in the mix for what is still for 1 more year, the college football playoff. So I believe things are different. I know this sounds crazy, but in this league, which is 70 years old, I believe the best season in ACC football history as part of the backdrop to 3 of the last 10 national championships. We're used to saying that in basketball, right? We're used to saying it in other sports for the ACC. We don't often say it in football. You can both say that the ACC's greatest football season ever came within the last decade. It was 2016. And for those who have short memories, as I do for many things, but not this topic, in 2016, think about this. Clemson won the national championship. Lamar Jackson of Louisville won the Heisman Trophy. Florida State still had Jimbo Fisher. They finished in the national top 10 with double-digit wins. Bobby Petrino was the coach at Louisville. He not only produces the Heisman-winning quarterback, the Cardinals won 9 games and were in the final top 25. Mark Richt was at Miami at the time. The Canes were in the top 25. Justin Fuente was new at Virginia Tech at the time. The Hokies finished in the national top 25. If you as a football league produce 2 of the top 10, Clemson and Florida State, this is again 2016, and you also produce 5 of the top 25, and oh, by the way, 11 of your 14 teams went to bowl games, that shows, it was only a snapshot, 2016, that shows that you can be temporarily the best football league in America. Now, I know there have been disappointments since then. I know they missed the college football playoff the last 2 years, again, after making it 7 years in a row. But that decade-long snapshot is more good than bad. Those 3 national championships are not a mirage. Again, 3 other leagues wish they were in those shoes. And there are enough reasons, starting with Clemson and Florida State, but also some teams closer to home that we can get into, to believe that this year will be better than the relative disappointments of 2021 and 2022.
It's been 70 years since some guys got together in the gate city of Greensboro out at Sedgefield Country Club and they formed the Atlantic Coast Conference. But next month, in August of 2023, the Atlantic Coast Conference moves right down I-85 here to the Queen City of Charlotte, where we're having this football kickoff today and all this week. And then the ACC Championship game will be over at Bank of America Stadium again this year at Queen City bookends for the Atlantic Coast Conference. How big of a deal is that?
I think it's a bigger deal than most do. I think the average fan might not care whether the ACC headquarters is in Greensboro or Charlotte, but consider this. You have lifelong roots in the great state of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. I don't go quite back that far, but I have 35 years of roots here. And in our time, we have seen Charlotte grow from an interesting growing city to, believe it or not, Mike, it feels weird to say this out loud, Charlotte is now the 4th largest city in the Eastern time zone. I know that sounds crazy. It's New York City. Which
the traffic does justify that.
Think of it.
It does.
New York City is a ginormous city by world standards. That's number one. My original hometown of Philadelphia is actually number 2. Jacksonville, Florida is nowadays number 3. Charlotte has grown so consistently over the last 30 plus years that it is now number 4 on that list. It is trending toward 1 million people just in the city limits, and it's trending toward 3 million people when you look at sort of the metro area, so Charlotte proper and the surrounding areas. Why does that matter? Well, whereas the Greensboro area has a grand total of 0 Fortune 500 companies, the greater Charlotte area has more than a dozen, either in Charlotte or a short drive from Charlotte. Mm-hmm. Why does that matter? Well, as you and I know with the new North Carolina Sports Network, we don't exist without the North Carolina Port Council and XL Moving and Storage and Sport Clips Haircuts and King Neptune Restaurant and Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach. And the original Saltworks.
I love that place.
And Lawson Insurance Group.
Absolutely.
We don't exist without our partners. The ACC exists, but the ACC can't thrive the way it wants to thrive without more corporate partners. There are a lot of reasons the SEC and the Big Ten have started to lap the ACC financially. Some of it has to do with more people watch football games in those leagues. It's not like John Swofford doesn't know how to negotiate a contract. John Swofford, in the current ACC deal, was dealing with fewer cards in his hand. Whoever the Big Ten commissioner is at a given time, whoever the SEC commissioner at a given time is, they get to say, hey, you know these TV games we're selling you? Millions and millions and millions of people watch these. Quick number for you. In 2021, of the 20 most watched regular season conference football games, 18 of those 20 were either in the Big Ten or the SEC. That means people just care more. They're watching in larger numbers. And I don't mean just for Michigan, Ohio State. I mean sometimes for just the good old-fashioned, good old boy matchup in the SEC or the Big Ten. They are huge universities. They have large living alumni bases. And bottom line, they watch a lot of college football games in large numbers. Yeah. The ACC has a reputation well-earned for passion for men's basketball and even some other sports. It's not that ACC fans don't care about football. They do in large numbers, just not in as large numbers as those other two leagues. So the move to Charlotte after those 70 years in Greensboro, which I cherish, I still love going to the ACC tournament when it's there. I'm not knocking Greensboro. But Charlotte is an international city with an airport that is a hub airport, where I know most North Carolinians don't care, but the number of direct flights from Greensboro to some of these ACC
doesn't
cities,
exist.
Correct.
Have done stuff to Charlotte.
A whole bunch from Charlotte go directly to Tallahassee, directly to Syracuse, directly to Louisville. Doesn't matter to most North Carolinians, right? It does matter. 11 of the 15 schools are not located in North Carolina. Charlotte is a city that continues to grow. It has a rich corporate environment. As you said to start, ACC kickoff is here in July. ACC headquarters are here in August. ACC championship game is here in December. They hope Charlotte is a 365-day-a-year partner for the Atlantic Coast Conference, and where nobody believes anything is going to close the financial gap that the ACC is dealing with right now behind the SEC and the Big Ten, and only those two, by the way. The Big 12 and the Pac-12, I would argue, have even more problems than the ACC has. Charlotte can be part of the solution for those demographic reasons, for those corporate reasons, for those Fortune 500 reasons. They still have to connect the dots, but that's why I think this move is at least one way that the ACC can take some baby steps toward closing that financial gap.
And it's an exciting team to look at when you look at the entire thing. Charlotte does bring a complete package to the table. But when you look at the ACC, like David says, historically viewed as a basketball league, but arguably right now, you could have stronger Big Four, Wake Forest, NC State, North Carolina, Duke, stronger coaches on the football side than you have on the basketball side. You and I have talked about this for the past few weeks. You never would have said that. You never would have thought that, because the national reputation of the ACC is obviously it's a basketball league. That's the mantra that's out there. But right now, Mike Elko at Duke, Dave Doran at NC State, Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, and Mack Brown, who's already in the College Football Hall of Fame as a head coach, Texas National Championship at North Carolina. This is a very strong group. And based on where basketball has been the past couple of years, yeah, you've been to the Final Four, but not bringing home the hardware. Again, you look at that, very comparable between football and basketball, maybe for the first time in ACC history.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I have some optimism about this year. Mike Elko won 9 games at Duke last year. That is only the 7th time in the history of Duke football that the Blue Devils have won 9 or more games. And remember, he was a rookie head coach.
Right.
Dave Clawson has taken the Demon Deacons, who historically have been a bottom feeder. I know, shout out to P-Head Walker, as you like to say. But 7 straight bowls at Wake Forest is a big deal. And Dave Clawson is just one of the sharpest people, much less football coaches, that I have encountered in my 35 years covering this league. Mack Brown is one of a small number of active head coaches who have won a national title. Now, he did it at Texas, obviously, but he also built a couple of top 10 teams at Carolina in the 1990s and came real close to another 10-win season last year. Drake May is back, of course. Dave Doran, like Dave Clawson, as crazy as it sounds, Mike, when you're at your school for a decade, you are now one of the 10, well, in that case, 2 of the 10 longest tenured coaches in all of FBS football. Dave Clawson and Dave Doran are both on that short list.
It's the Daves.
It's those guys, so it's those 4 guys in our backyard, coaching-wise. It's also Mike Norvell, turned it around at Florida State last year. Dabo, to me, ranks only behind, I know this sounds crazy because Dabo's only a little older than 50 years old. I think he's the 2nd best coach in ACC football history, regardless of what he adds to his resume. 2 national championships, 7 of the last ACC titles, last 8. You know, that's a lot of good coaches
behind
that we just
who?
mentioned.
Bowden?
Behind Bobby Bowden.
Right.
Bobby would be 1A. Dabo's 1B and has plenty of time to add to his resume. So the coaches have me optimistic, and the other part of that optimism is the quarterbacks. So you and I have already interviewed some of these folks. Think about it. Drake May of UNC might be the greatest quarterback in school history, and he's going to be a high NFL draft pick. Maybe, we'll see. They talk about him as a Heisman Trophy candidate. It's easy to say.
You've got to have a team to come through. Does he have the team around him?
We'll see.
We'll have to wait.
The optimism, though, is reflected in those quarterbacks. A lot of people don't understand. The ACC produces the 2nd most players in the NFL, behind only the SEC. So again, I'm not knocking the SEC. They are the kings of college football, and they've earned it.
Yep.
Most national titles, most depth, best line play, and most NFL draft picks. But the ACC is number 2 in that national titles in the last decade category. The ACC is number 2 in NFL draft picks over the last decade or so. That's not a bad place to be, and especially at quarterback. The ACC produces more NFL quarterbacks than either the SEC or the Big Ten.
North Carolina next year, if Drake May goes to the league, and he's a starting quarterback very early in his career, you could have, if Mitch Trubisky gets back on track and Sam Howell's doing well, North Carolina could have not 1, not 2, but 3 starting quarterbacks in the NFL, or at least guys in the 2 deep, when they only have 1 starter in the NBA right now, and that starter was a transfer, Cam Johnson, who, transferred from, Hale to Pitt to Chapel Hill. That's an amazing thing. Again, the transformation, the league has truly come a long way, and you talk about this. We're going to have the opportunity to talk to a lot of head coaches here over the time that we're here at the ACC Football Kickoff, but the players, There is some great players on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, here in the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Well, remember, UNC has gone from putting no starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and I mean for like 100 years, that number was 0, to now multiple. And that Carolina NFL quarterback tradition that you just circled, Mike, comes on the heels, no pun intended, of the NC State Wolfpack's tradition. With Russell Wilson and Phillip Rivers and Mike Glennon and Jacoby Brissett. I mean, this is a heck of a run now. But if we just take it to 20,
and Duke,
correct. If we just take it to 2023, Drake May at Carolina, Jordan Travis at Florida State, Riley Leonard of Duke, who we just interviewed on the North Carolina Sports Network. Brennan Armstrong was great 2 years ago at UVA. Not as good last year at UVA, but now he's a transfer for the Wolfpack, and he's reunited with his former coordinator, Robert Anae, that he had in Charlotte.
An absolute genius football coach.
So think about it. There's only 14 teams in this league, all right? May, Jordan Travis, Riley Leonard of Duke, Brennan Armstrong now of NC State, Cade Klubnik of Clemson, was the MVP of the championship game, the ACC championship game, when the Tigers beat the Tar Heels last year. Now, he wasn't great in the bowl game, so I'm not sure we're ready to crown him as great just yet, but high-profile recruit, brilliant against the Tar Heels. He only has one career college start, but he's supposedly the next guy for Clemson. Garrett Schrader at Syracuse, who's actually a Charlotte guy, had his best year of his career. He's another one of those 5th or 6th year guys, so that's the orange. And there's a 6th year guy named Jack Plummer, who's going to probably be the starter at Louisville. Why do I mention him? Well, Jeff Brom is a new head coach at Louisville. Remember Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati. Where is Jack Plummer from? Well, he threw for 3,000 yards at Cal last year, but he was at Purdue prior to that. So he is reuniting. Jeff Brom is not starting from scratch at the most important position in the field.
Jeff Brom's a great football coach.
He is.
A great football coach.
And how about this? He has 2 former Purdue quarterbacks on his depth chart at Louisville. So again, he's got a whole depth chart of guys who know his way.
Makes it easy. It lubes up that transition right now for a coach.
Tyler Van Dyke is at Miami. He hasn't reached his potential yet, but you know it's in there. Wake lost Sam Hartman to Notre Dame via the transfer portal, but they have a guy named Mitch Griffiths they believe in. Phil Dracovic went from Boston College to Pitt, and the Panthers think they can get more out of him than the Eagles did. That's what? I just mentioned 8 or 9 quarterbacks in a 14-team league. Those head coaches and those quarterbacks give the ACC a chance to have a special season somewhat like the one they had in 2016.
One of the big things that's been talked about in the ACC, we alluded to it earlier here on today's show, is the revenue differential between teams, and there are plans. Commissioner Phillips said the other day, there are plans to give a higher distribution of that wealth going to the teams that generate the wealth. You know, it's not going to be one size fits all. The same can be said for football this year, because gone are the divisions. No more Coastal, no more Atlantic. The best teams will go. So you don't have all the good teams in one division and then all the weak teams in the other, and one of the weak teams gets that lucky dog opportunity to play in a championship game. Now it really is the best against the best. And I think that will go a long way to helping the ACC improve its postseason cachet, and the talk will be like that now. Hey, the best 2 go ahead. Who are the best 2 going to be this year, Dan?
My guess, and that's all it is an educated guess, is Clemson and Florida State. Remember, Clemson has won, as we said, 7 of the last 8 ACC titles. It was actually Florida State that won 3 in a row prior to that. And I think the Seminoles are for real. They have, there are metrics including returning production. So you just look at last year's statistics, calculate who left for the NFL, who left via the transfer portal, but who's also back on your depth chart. The Seminoles, out of more than 100 FBS programs, returned 87% of last year's production. That is the highest number, percentage-wise, in all of FBS football.
It's amazing.
Mike Norvell won 10 games last year, finished in the national top 10 in one of the polls, has 87% back. And remember, it is Jordan Travis at quarterback. They have a guy named Trey Benson, who on some NFL boards is the #1 college running back. Incredibly productive last year, back and has some good backups. Johnny Wilson is that supersized wide receiver they have. He's back. Jared Verse could have turned pro, their pass rushing defensive end, decided to stay in the anticipation that he thought the Seminoles were going to have an even more special season than last year's 10-3. And they hit the transfer portal, the incoming transfer portal really well also. I think Mike Norvell, did a great job at Memphis. After 2 slow building years and ugly records in Tallahassee, he had his first huge step forward last year. I think he can continue that. And whereas Clemson does have some questions, you can't really doubt the Dabo dynasty. There's a reason he's won 7 of the last 8 ACC titles. I'm not saying nobody else has a chance. I mean, there are Miami fans who think the Hurricanes will finally break through year 2 of Mario Cristobal. Drake May gives the Tar Heels a chance. We'll see how much support he gets on both sides of the ball. Duke is intriguing, coming off of 9 wins because Riley Leonard is that special. Some people believe Drake May and Riley Leonard are 2 of the 6 top prospects for the next NFL draft at the quarterback position. And there are other candidates. Louisville has a lighter schedule, and the good coach that you mentioned, and the transfer quarterbacks that we mentioned. The Cardinals could be a surprise team, probably not in the ACC title game. Again, that starts with the Seminoles and the Tigers. But if those 2 live up to their preseason hype, and then a handful of others, probably one of which we don't see coming, then the ACC is back to having both the high-end quality, maybe an entry in the college football playoff. Remember, we don't get to 12 teams in the playoff for another year. So it's going to be hard to be one of those Final Four, to steal the basketball phrase. But they have a chance. They have the coaches, the quarterbacks, and the talent to have a chance. And that makes, this trip to the ACC kickoff event more fun than some of the years where I just knew that high-end talent and that national championship contention was probably not going to be in the cards for the ACC in football.
One of the things that those of us in the media on this side of the camera love is a little bit of chaos. Can you imagine the collective groans from Jim Phillips and Burt Magnus of ESPN if in week 1, North Carolina loses to South Carolina and Duke in Wallace Wade with a Cameron-like atmosphere, because they're going to have it sold out, on Labor Day night, national TV, Duke gets the win over Clemson? I mean, it could just blow it all up right there. But you never know. And you've got to come out of the gate strong. If you're going to win the Derby, you've got to come out strong. You can't be limping out. There's no, redemption or that divisional title out there to save you if you have a flub up. And those are tough games. I wouldn't want to beat Clemson going into Duke, because Mike Elko has the Duke Blue Devils football program really running at a confident pace. Not just excited, but confident. And they have that 9-win season to back that up. North Carolina struggled down the stretch last year. And then we're not even talking about NC State, but they could be, again, Robert and I as an offensive coordinator could mean more to NC State and well-rounding that Wolfpack program. And we've not even talked about Dave Clawson. Now, he did lose that quarterback. But Dave Clawson seems like he's the kind of coach that always has a plan in the back. There's always somebody next. There's a next. There's a next. And, it's just down the street. So, in summary, this has been an exciting time in Charlotte. Still more to come here on the North Carolina Sports Network. And we do have to talk about this, though. It was the last thing on our list. There's been a lot of talk about expansion. What's going to happen? The Pac-12 losing UCLA and USC to the Big Ten. What could happen down the road? I asked you in our first content piece back on July 6th, will the Atlantic Coast Conference be around in 5 years as we know it today? What say you?
I say it will. And you know what's happened, and we knew each other a long time ago, but in our more recent reunion and time together, you've seen this. My phone rings off the hook every few months. When there is a national story that Florida State is about to jump somewhere, Clemson is about to jump to another league, my phone rings because I'm the guy that created the ACC Sports Journal a long time ago and ACCSports.com after that. So I've kind of been the ACC guy for much of the last 30 years. Well, what has happened through about 6 to 8 rotations of panicky phone calls, people telling me that they know the ACC is about to disintegrate. And I'm like, hold on, Tiger. I cover this league pretty closely. I don't have a crystal ball, but I've been right a lot of times. as these national headlines predicting doom and gloom have been wrong about 8 times in a row, and the ACC is still together. Now, I can't tell anybody that a year or 2 or 5 years from now, Florida State or Clemson or somebody else might not kind of break glass in case of emergency, the way that old saying goes. I don't know that. In fact, I'll bet you those university presidents would be honest and tell you they're not sure of that. The financial gap is that large. That ACC check coming in right now is about 40 million-ish. Those other leagues are making 50 million-ish per school per year plus. That gap is probably manageable. Quick reminder, what league has won the most national championships over the last couple of years? The ACC. So obviously falling behind financially has not stopped them from winning on the field, on the court, in a whole bunch of sports. If you're winning the most titles, that's the end of that debate right there. Now, if the financial gap gets to those Big Ten and SEC schools are getting $100 million every year, and the ACC has only grown to, let's say, $60 million, and year after year after year, the teams are trying to beat on the field are just, ramping over you in terms of their budget, that becomes a problem. But that grant of rights, Mike, I practiced law for 17 years. I've seen the document. If it was really weak and vulnerable, someone would have challenged not only the ACC grant of rights, but the Big 12 grant of rights or the others that have incorporated it. It's hard to succinctly summarize what the grant of rights is, but let's just say it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to leave the Atlantic Coast Conference. Again, some school could say, hey, we're going to leave and let's let the lawyers figure out the grant of rights and how sturdy it is. And maybe a Florida State or a Clemson or somebody else at some point says, we're leaving, let the lawyers figure it out. I can't tell you that's an impossibility. However, it is such a high risk right now. You not only would pay $150 million plus exit fee, that's ironclad. You would give up the rights to your media rights for the next, 13 years. This goes all the way through 2036. Now in 2029, will some schools say, well, we only have to pay 6 more years of penalties rather than the current 13 years? We can't speculate that far down the road. I don't know what that gap's going to look like. So many things can change in the next 5 years. But the idea that the ACC is on the verge of disintegration, I think, has been an exaggeration in those false news reports of the past few years. And I really don't think it's going to crumble at any point in the next several years. Let's reevaluate a few years down the road, but until then, I encourage people to be extremely skeptical when some guy out there tells you that the ACC is about to fall apart, because I'm the guy that's told you 10 times in a row it wasn't going to fall apart, and I'm 10-0 and they're 0-10.
There you go. This is David Glenn. I'm Mike Waddell. We're coming to you from the ACC Kickoff. We'll have more coming up over the weekend on Friday. So much to talk about here. ACC football, perhaps the best season top to bottom in the history of this league, going back 70 years, and we'll cover it all for you right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.